The evening light filtered through the tall windows of the music academy, casting long shadows across the grand hall. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and old sheet music. In that quiet space, when most students had already gone home, a woman in a faded gray uniform moved silently between the rows of instruments. Her name was Aisha. She worked as a cleaner in the academy, sweeping the floors, dusting the pianos, and wiping down the mirrors after a long day of music practice. To everyone else, she was invisible, just another part of the background, someone who appeared when the noise ended and disappeared before the next morning began. She didn't mind the work. What she minded was how people looked through her, as if she wasn't really there. The young students came from wealthy families, always talking about their expensive vacations and the competitions they would win. They walked past her without a word, sometimes leaving behind coffee cups or crumpled music sheets for her to clean. But every now and then, when the hall emptied and the chatter faded, Aisha allowed herself a small secret. She would stand near the pianos and listen. She didn't just hear the notes. She felt them. Each sound carried her somewhere far away, back to a time when music had been her dream. As a child, she had learned to play on an old upright piano that her father had repaired for her. They were not rich, but he always said that music was the language of the heart, and that she should never stop playing. For a while, she believed she could become someone, maybe even perform on a real stage one day. But life, with its quiet cruelty, had other plans. When her father passed away and her family fell into debt, she had to leave her lessons behind and take whatever work she could find. Years later, fate had placed her back inside a music academy, but not as a student, as the cleaner who wiped fingerprints off the very instruments she once dreamed of playing. The academy was known for its elite students, many of whom treated it like a social club more than a place of learning. Among them was a girl named Lara, the daughter of a well-known businessman. She was beautiful, confident, and endlessly proud of her talent. Her family had donated a large sum to the academy, and because of that, she was treated almost like royalty. Teachers praised her even when her performances lacked emotion, and other students admired her more for her wealth than her skill. She often spoke loudly about her new designer clothes, her weekend trips, and the grand piano that had been custom-made for her home. Aisha often saw Lara from a distance, surrounded by a group of friends who laughed at everything she said. Once, when Aisha was mopping the corridor, she accidentally brushed Lara's bag with her mop handle. Lara's face twisted with disgust. "Be careful," she snapped. "Do you know how much this bag costs?" Aisha quickly apologized, bowing her head. "I'm sorry, miss. I didn't mean to." Lara rolled her eyes. "Just watch what you're doing next time." Then she walked away without another glance. Her friends snickered, whispering as if Aisha couldn't hear. But she did. She heard everything. Still, Aisha stayed quiet. She had learned long ago that silence was her safest response. Every day she arrived early, worked through the echoes of the music, and left after dark when the last note had faded. But deep inside her there was a spark that refused to die, a quiet ache that came alive every time she touched the piano keys while cleaning. Sometimes she'd run a cloth across the keyboard, and her fingers would pause just a second longer, brushing over the smooth ivory like an old friend. One evening, a storm rolled outside. Rain drummed softly against the windows and thunder grumbled in the distance. The academy was almost empty. Only the nightlights glowed faintly in the halls. Aisha had just finished cleaning the practice rooms when she walked into the main hall. There it stood, the grand piano shining like black glass in the dim light. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She walked closer, drawn to it as if it called her name. She looked around, no one was there. The security guard had gone for his tea and the last student had left an hour ago. Her heart pounded. She set down her mop and gently lifted the piano lid. The keys glistened under her fingertips. For a moment she hesitated. She hadn't played in years. What if she had forgotten? What if she made a mistake? But then she took a slow breath and pressed one key. The sound that came out was pure and soft, like a whisper from her past. She pressed another, then another, until her fingers began to remember what her mind had long buried. She played a melody she had once loved as a girl, something slow, tender, and full of longing. The notes filled the empty hall, mixing with the sound of rain outside. Her eyes closed, and for a few minutes she wasn't a cleaner anymore. She was a pianist again, the one she had dreamed of becoming. Each key told her story. Of loss, of struggle, of beauty found in the simplest moments. The music flowed naturally, like it had been waiting inside her all this time. Just waiting for her to find it again. She didn't know that someone was watching. Lara had returned to the academy to retrieve her phone, which she'd forgotten during her last lesson. As she walked through the hall, she froze when she heard the sound of a piano. At first, she thought one of the teachers was still practicing, but when she peeked through the door, her mouth fell open. There on the stool sat the cleaner, the same woman she had scolded a few days ago, playing her piano. Lara's first feeling was anger. How dare the cleaner touch something that didn't belong to her? But before she could speak, she stopped. The melody was unlike anything she had ever heard. It wasn't perfect or polished like the pieces she performed for competitions. It was raw, full of emotion that seemed to pull at her heart. She had never heard such feeling in music before. For the first time, she felt small, her pride shrinking as she listened. Still, her pride wouldn't let her stay silent for long. The moment Aisha lifted her fingers from the keys, startled by the sound of footsteps behind her, Lara crossed her arms and said coldly, "What do you think you're doing?" Aisha jumped to her feet, her face turning pale. I'm sorry, miss," she stammered. "I was just cleaning and Cleaning?" Lara scoffed. "It looked like you were playing my piano." She spoke loudly, her voice echoing through the hall. "Do you even know how expensive this is? You shouldn't be touching it." Aisha lowered her eyes, her hands trembling. "I didn't mean any harm. I just wanted to hear how it sounded." At that moment, 2 other students entered, curious about the noise. They looked from Lara to Aisha, their faces full of amusement. "What's going on?" one asked. Lara smirked. "Our cleaner here was giving us a concert," she said sarcastically. The others laughed, and Aisha's cheeks burned with shame. She quickly picked up her cleaning tools, whispering another apology. "I'm sorry. It won't happen again." Her voice was barely audible. Lara watched her go, still feeling that strange mix of anger and confusion. Deep down, though, something about that melody wouldn't leave her. That night, when Aisha went home, she sat by her small window listening to the rain. Her hands still tingled from the piano keys. For the first time in years, she had felt alive, but now she also felt humiliated. She promised herself she wouldn't touch that piano again. Yet as she closed her eyes, the melody returned in her mind, soft and haunting. She couldn't stop hearing it. It was a piece of her soul she had accidentally let out, and now it refused to be silenced. What she didn't know was that this single moment, her quiet act of touching the piano, would change everything. The music she played that night had already begun to stir something unexpected in the people who heard it. It was the beginning of a story that would soon turn the entire academy upside down. And no one, not even Aisha herself, could have imagined how far it would go. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the music academy, painting warm streaks across the polished floors. The air was filled with the faint smell of coffee and the echo of pianos being tuned. Students walked through the halls, laughing and talking about their weekend plans, but Aisha moved quietly among them, pushing her cleaning cart. Her head was bowed lower than usual. The night before kept replaying in her mind. The moment Lara had caught her playing the piano, the laughter of the students, the sting of shame in her chest. She wished she could erase it all. She hadn't meant to break any rules. She just wanted to touch those keys again, to feel that piece of her life she had lost long ago. But now she feared she had gone too far. Every time she passed a student, she felt as though they were whispering about her. In her heart, she knew most of them hadn't even noticed what happened, but her mind wouldn't let her rest. She began her morning routine, sweeping the corridors and polishing the railings. As she worked, she could hear faint music drifting from one of the practice rooms. It was Lara, her confident hands moving across the piano keys, playing a fast classical piece. The notes were sharp and precise, but there was something missing, something Aisha couldn't help but notice. The music sounded beautiful yet empty. She paused for a moment near the door, just listening. She wasn't angry at Lara, only sad that the girl couldn't feel what she played. It reminded her of herself when she was young, always told to be perfect, always told to impress others. But true music, she thought, was never about perfection. It was about truth. Suddenly, Lara's voice came from inside. Is someone there? Aisha jumped back. I'm sorry, miss. I didn't mean to disturb you, she said quickly. Lara frowned, recognizing her. Oh, it's you, she said with a tone halfway between curiosity and annoyance. You're the one who played last night, right? Aisha's cheeks warmed. Yes, I'm really sorry about that. It won't happen again. Lara tilted her head slightly. She had planned to make a snide comment, but something inside her stopped her. The sound of that melody still lingered in her mind. She wanted to ask where Aisha had learned to play like that, but pride held her back. Instead, she said, You shouldn't be touching the instruments. They're expensive. Yes, I understand, Aisha replied softly. I'm sorry. Lara nodded, pretending to be satisfied, but when Aisha walked away, she found herself staring at the piano in confusion. She tried to replay the tune she had heard last night, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't match the feeling. The more she played, the more she realized how lifeless her own music felt compared to the cleaners. It made her uncomfortable in a way she couldn't explain. Later that afternoon, while the academy buzzed with activity, Lara told her friends about what had happened. You won't believe this, she said. The cleaner was playing the piano last night, mine. Her friends gasped and laughed. Oh no, what did you do? One asked. I caught her, of course, Lara replied proudly. You should have seen her face, completely terrified. They laughed again, but one of them asked, Did she actually play something? Like, could she even play? Lara hesitated. She did, but it was weird. She wasn't just playing random notes. It actually sounded good. Her friends exchanged surprised looks, then one shrugged. Maybe she got lucky. Anyone can press a few keys and make it sound nice. Lara forced a laugh, but she knew it wasn't true. What she heard last night wasn't luck. It was something deeper, something she didn't have. She didn't want to admit it out loud, but that melody had touched her in a way that her own playing never did. That evening, Aisha finished her work quietly and was about to leave when the academy director walked by. He was a kind older man with a calm voice. You're still here, Aisha? He asked gently. Yes, sir. I was just finishing up the last classroom, she replied. You work very hard, he said with a smile. We appreciate it. Don't forget to take care of yourself, too. Thank you, sir, she said politely. As he walked away, Aisha felt a small warmth in her heart. It wasn't often that someone spoke to her kindly. She gathered her things and walked toward the exit, but as she passed the main hall, she stopped again. The grand piano sat under the soft glow of the ceiling lights, waiting in silence. She told herself not to look at it, but her eyes lingered. She could almost hear the notes calling to her. For a moment, she imagined herself sitting there, her fingers gliding effortlessly across the keys, filling the hall with music again. But she quickly shook her head and kept walking. She couldn't risk it again, not after what happened. The next few days passed quietly. Aisha continued her work, and the students continued their lessons. But things began to change in small, almost invisible ways. A few students had started whispering about the cleaner who could play. Someone must have overheard Lara's story and told others. Some laughed at the idea while others were simply curious. One afternoon, when Aisha was mopping near the main hall, two young students approached her. Excuse me, one said shyly. Were you the one who played the piano the other night? Aisha looked up, surprised. Oh, I'm not sure what you mean, she said nervously. The boy smiled. It's okay. We heard it was really good. Her heart softened at the kindness in his tone. That's very nice of you, she said quietly. But it was just a small thing. Nothing special. The students smiled again and walked off, whispering excitedly to each other. Aisha stood there for a while, her heart both heavy and light. It had been so long since anyone had said something nice about her playing. Meanwhile, Lara couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Every time she sat down to practice, the melody played by the cleaner haunted her. It made her question her own talent. For years, she had been praised by everyone, teachers, judges, even her parents. But now she began to wonder if all that praise had blinded her. Maybe she wasn't as good as she thought. One day during a rehearsal, her teacher stopped her mid-performance. Lara, your technique is fine, he said, but there's no feeling in your music. You're playing the notes, not the story. The words stung more than she expected. She nodded politely, but her thoughts were far away. That night she couldn't sleep. The sound of that haunting melody kept echoing in her head. Who was that cleaner, really? How could someone who worked all day cleaning floors play with such depth? The next evening, when the academy was empty again, Lara came back to the hall alone. She sat at the piano and tried to remember the tune Aisha had played. She closed her eyes and let her hands move gently across the keys. Slowly, the melody began to take shape. It wasn't perfect, but it carried something real, something that made her heart ache. For the first time, she felt emotion in her playing. At that exact moment, Aisha entered quietly from the side door holding her mop. When she saw Lara sitting there, she froze, unsure whether to stay or leave. But then Lara looked up, startled, and smiled awkwardly. "Oh, it's you," Lara said softly, not in anger this time. "I was trying to remember what you played that night." Aisha hesitated, then said in a low voice, "It wasn't a real song. Just something I used to play when I was younger. It was beautiful," Lara said honestly. "I can't get it out of my head." Aisha looked surprised by the compliment. No one had ever said something like that to her in years. She smiled faintly. "Thank you, miss. That means a lot." Lara studied her for a moment. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Aisha hesitated, unsure if she should share her story. But there was something genuine in Lara's voice. "My father taught me," she said quietly. "Before he passed away, he used to tell me that music is a way to speak when words fail." Lara nodded slowly, her eyes softening. For once, she didn't see Aisha as just a cleaner. She saw her as someone with a story, someone who had lived through things that she couldn't imagine. For a while, they just sat there in silence, the grand piano between them like a bridge. It was a strange, fragile moment. Two people from completely different worlds connected by something simple and powerful. Music. When Aisha finally left the hall that night, she felt lighter than she had in a long time, and though she didn't know it yet, that moment of connection would soon lead to something far greater, something that would test pride, reveal truth, and change both their lives forever. It was a quiet morning at the academy, but the air carried a different kind of energy. The students were gathering in the main hall for a small rehearsal session. The director had announced that a few students would be selected to perform at the annual charity concert, and everyone wanted to impress him. The hall was full of nervous excitement, pianos being tested, notes filling the space, voices echoing down the corridor. Aisha was there early, as always, sweeping and polishing before the event began. She tried to keep her focus on her work, but her eyes kept wandering toward the grand piano on the stage. She hadn't touched it since that night. Every time she passed it, her hands itched to play again, but she reminded herself of the warning look in Lara's eyes when she was caught. She didn't want to cause any more trouble. Still, something had changed between them since that evening when they talked. Lara was different now. She didn't look through Aisha the way she used to. Sometimes when they crossed paths, Lara even nodded slightly or gave a polite smile, something that would have been impossible weeks ago. It wasn't friendship, not yet, but it was the beginning of understanding. When the rehearsal began, Lara was the first to perform. She sat at the piano, her posture straight and confident. The room fell silent as her fingers began to move. The melody was elegant and fast, each note played with precision. But halfway through, she made a small mistake. Her rhythm faltered for just a moment, and she frowned. Her friends still clapped politely when she finished, but the director didn't look entirely impressed. "You're talented, Lara," he said gently, "but you're rushing the feeling. Don't just play the notes and tell me something with them." His words echoed in her mind, and she couldn't help but think of Aisha's music, how it had emotion, warmth, and truth. It made her wonder if she was really as good as everyone said, or if she was simply trained to sound perfect without feeling it. When rehearsal ended, Lara stayed behind, sitting at the piano long after everyone had left. Aisha came in quietly to start cleaning. She noticed Lara still sitting there, lost in thought. For a moment she hesitated, then softly asked, "Is something wrong, miss?" Lara looked up, surprised. "Oh, no, not really. I just can't seem to play the way I want to," she admitted. "The director said I'm missing emotion. But I don't understand what that means." Aisha smiled gently. "Sometimes emotion doesn't come from learning. It comes from living." Lara tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "When you've lost something or struggled for something or loved something deeply," Aisha said softly, "you play differently. You don't just press the keys. You pour your heart into them." Lara looked down at her hands. "I wish I knew how to do that." Aisha hesitated for a long moment. Then quietly she said, "Would you like me to show you something?" Lara blinked in surprise. "You'd teach me?" "If you want," Aisha replied with a humble smile. "It's just something simple, but maybe it'll help." Lara nodded eagerly, stepping aside as Aisha sat down at the piano. She placed her fingers gently on the keys as if greeting an old friend. Then she began to play, slow, soft notes that blended into a melody full of sadness and hope. Her hands moved gracefully, but it wasn't about technique. It was about feeling. Each note told a story that words couldn't. Lara stood there frozen, watching her. The music filled the room like a warm wind. It was so different from anything she had heard before. When the final note faded, she whispered, "That was incredible." Aisha smiled shyly. "It's just an old tune I made up a long time ago." Lara's voice softened.
"Can you teach me that?"
For a moment, Aisha hesitated. She wasn't sure if she should. After all, she was just a cleaner and Lara was the Academy's star student. But the sincerity in Lara's eyes made her nod. "All right," she said quietly. Over the next few evenings after everyone left, Lara and Aisha met secretly in the main hall. They would sit at the piano together, Lara learning, Aisha guiding. At first, Lara struggled to play without thinking too much about the notes, but slowly, she began to feel the music instead of calculating it. "Close your eyes," Aisha told her one night. "Don't look at the keys. Just listen," Lara obeyed. Her hands trembled at first, but then she began to play softly, her heart leading her fingers. The melody came out uneven but filled with emotion. When she opened her eyes, Aisha was smiling. "That's it," Aisha said quietly. "That's what music feels like." Something in Lara's chest shifted that night. For the first time, she felt connected, not to her fame, not to her wealth, but to something real. She realized how little she had understood about people like Aisha, who lived with quiet strength and unspoken dreams. But their secret couldn't stay hidden forever. One evening, while they were practicing, a group of students entered the hall unexpectedly. They had come to retrieve some forgotten sheet music and froze at the sight before them. The cleaner sitting at the piano, teaching the Academy's star student. "What's going on here?" One of them said loudly. "Lara, what are you doing?" Lara stood quickly, embarrassed. "It's not what you think," she tried to explain, but they were already laughing. "She's your teacher now?" One of them joked. "What's next? She'll be performing at the concert?" Aisha's face turned red. She stepped back from the piano, her eyes on the floor. "I should go," she murmured, gathering her things. But before she could leave, Lara's voice stopped her. "Wait," she said firmly, turning to the others. "She was just helping me. And for your information, she's better than most of us here." The laughter faded instantly. No one had expected Lara to defend her. The room went silent except for the soft hum of the lights. Aisha looked up in shock, but Lara's expression was steady and proud. "She plays with more heart than anyone I've ever met," Lara continued. "If you'd actually listen instead of judging, you'd understand what real music sounds like." The students looked at each other awkwardly. One of them muttered, "All right, calm down. We didn't mean anything." But Lara didn't respond. She turned back to Aisha, who was still standing there, speechless. "You didn't have to do that," Aisha whispered. "Yes, I did," Lara said softly. "You taught me something no one else ever could. I'm not ashamed of that." From that day on, something shifted in the Academy. Whispers spread again, but they were different this time. Some mocked, but others were curious. Word reached the director that Lara had been learning from the cleaner, and instead of being angry, he was intrigued. He decided to see for himself. A few days later, during a rehearsal, he approached Aisha and said, "I've heard quite a few things about your music. Would you mind playing something for us?" The room fell silent. All eyes turned to her. Lara looked at her with quiet encouragement. Aisha hesitated, her hands trembling slightly. But then she took a deep breath and sat at the piano. The hall filled with a soft melody that wrapped around everyone like a story. The director's eyes widened, and even the students who once laughed stood frozen, captivated. When she finished, the silence was so complete that the sound of the final note seemed to linger forever. The director finally spoke, his voice full of emotion. "That was remarkable. You have a gift, Aisha, a rare one." Aisha lowered her gaze, unsure what to say. Lara's heart swelled with pride. She had known it all along. This woman was more than a cleaner. She was an artist who had been hidden in plain sight. That night, as Aisha walked home, the wind carried a lightness she hadn't felt in years. She had spent so long being invisible, but now people had truly seen her, not for her job, but for her music. And for the first time, she allowed herself to dream again. But she didn't know that the days ahead would bring challenges that would test her strength and humble those who once doubted her. The music that had once been her secret was about to change everything, for her, for Lara, and for the entire academy. The morning sun poured through the tall glass windows of the music academy, filling the hall with a soft golden light. The air buzzed with quiet excitement after what had happened a few days earlier. The story of the cleaner who could play the piano like a professional had spread through every corner of the building. Some students were amazed, others jealous, and a few simply couldn't believe it was true. Aisha, however, kept her head down and continued her work, pretending not to hear the whispers that followed her everywhere she went. She was still the cleaner. Still the woman with a mop in her hands and a quiet smile on her face. But deep inside, something had changed. For the first time in years, she felt alive again. The director's kind words after hearing her play still echoed in her mind. "You have a rare gift." Those words gave her a strength she didn't know she still had. That morning, the director called her into his office. Aisha walked in nervously, unsure what to expect. The room was lined with old photographs of past performances, trophies shining on the shelves. The director looked up from his desk and smiled warmly. "Aisha," he began, "I've been thinking about what I saw the other day. You have incredible talent. It would be a shame to let it go unseen." She blinked in surprise. "Sir, I'm just a cleaner here. I'm not supposed to—" He raised his hand gently. "I know your position, but talent doesn't care about titles. I want you to play one piece at our upcoming charity concert. Just one, no pressure. You deserve that chance." Aisha's mouth went dry. Her hands trembled slightly. "Me? Play? At the concert?" "Yes," he said firmly. "Think of it as a gift to yourself. The audience will love it. You have something they need to hear, something real." Tears welled in her eyes. "Thank you, sir. I don't know what to say." "Just say yes," he smiled. She nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." When she left his office, she felt both joy and fear. It had been years since she performed in front of anyone. What if she made a mistake? What if the students laughed again? But she pushed those thoughts aside. This was her moment to prove that dreams didn't have an age or a class. Later that day, Lara found her cleaning near the main hall. "Is it true?" she asked with wide eyes. "The director wants you to play at the concert?" Aisha smiled nervously. "Yes, he asked me this morning. I still can't believe it." Lara's face lit up with excitement. "That's amazing. You deserve it." "I'm scared," Aisha admitted softly. "It's been so long since I performed for anyone." Lara placed a hand on her arm. "Don't be. You've taught me that music isn't about showing off. It's about feeling. And when you play, people feel something. That's all that matters." Her words touched Aisha deeply. The bond between them had grown quietly, like a friendship that didn't need to be spoken aloud. As the concert day drew closer, Aisha began to practice every evening after her shift. She stayed long after the lights dimmed, playing until her fingers ached. The melodies that came from her heart were full of life and emotion. The empty hall became her secret world, a place where she could be herself again. Sometimes Lara would sneak in and sit quietly at the back, listening. She never interrupted, never spoke. She simply listened with her eyes closed, letting the music wash over her. One night, after Aisha finished playing, Lara walked up to her and said, "I wish I could play like that." Aisha smiled. "You already can. You just have to stop trying to sound perfect. Let your heart lead your hands." "I'll try," Lara said softly, but not everyone was happy about Aisha's new opportunity. Some of the older students felt it was unfair. "She's a cleaner," one said bitterly. "She doesn't belong on that stage," another nodded. "It's supposed to be a professional concert, not some charity act." Lara overheard their conversation and couldn't stay silent. "You all talk about talent, but none of you could play the way she does. You're just jealous because she makes you realize what real music is." They didn't reply, but the tension lingered. Word spread fast, and soon almost everyone was talking about whether it was right for a cleaner to perform alongside the academy's best students. Aisha heard some of the whispers, and though she tried to ignore them, they cut deep. One evening, as she sat alone in the hall, she stared at the piano, and wondered if she had made a mistake saying yes. Maybe they were right. Maybe she didn't belong. Her eyes filled with tears. She didn't hear Lara walk in until she spoke softly. "You're not thinking of quitting, are you?" Aisha wiped her eyes quickly. "I just don't know if I should go through with it. People are talking. They think it's wrong for someone like me to be on that stage." Lara walked closer and sat beside her. "They're wrong. You've earned this. You inspired me, Aisha. You made me understand music again. Don't let their words silence you." Aisha looked at her, her voice trembling. "You really think people will listen?" Lara smiled. "They'll listen the moment you play the first note." The night of the concert arrived. The academy was glowing with lights and guests filled the seats in the large auditorium. The atmosphere was grand, students in elegant clothes, parents chatting proudly, and the director standing near the stage, greeting everyone. Backstage, Aisha stood quietly in her simple dress, her hands clasped tightly together. Her heart pounded so fast she could hear it in her ears. She looked at the other performers, young, confident, dressed in fine gowns and suits. She felt completely out of place. Lara found her just before the performance started. "You look beautiful," she said warmly. Aisha smiled faintly. "I'm terrified." "That's how you know it matters," Lara said with a wink. "You've got this." When her name was called, a ripple of surprise moved through the audience. Some people whispered, recognizing her as the cleaner. Others simply waited to see what would happen. Aisha stepped onto the stage slowly. The lights were bright, and for a moment she felt frozen. The grand piano stood before her, shining under the spotlight. She took a deep breath, sat down, and closed her eyes. Then her fingers began to move. The first notes floated through the air, soft, trembling, filled with emotion. The room grew silent. Even those who had doubted her leaned forward, listening. Her music told a story of hardship, of patience, of lost dreams finding their way back to life. Every key she touched seemed to speak a word her voice never could. As the melody built, she forgot about the audience. She forgot about her uniform, the whispers, the fear. It was just her and the piano, the way it had always been in her heart. When the final note rang out, the hall remained silent for a moment, as if time itself had stopped. Then came the applause. It started slowly, a few claps, then grew louder until the entire room was standing. Some even wiped tears from their eyes. The director stood too, his expression proud and full of emotion. Aisha sat there in disbelief. She had done it. The dream she thought she had lost forever had just come true. When she stepped off the stage, Lara was waiting for her with tears shining in her eyes. "You were incredible," she whispered, hugging her tightly. Aisha smiled through her tears. "Thank you for believing in me." But even as the applause echoed in her ears, she knew this wasn't the end. Her performance had touched hearts, but it had also stirred up feelings, jealousy, admiration, and even anger among those who couldn't accept that someone like her had stolen the spotlight. That night, as the crowd dispersed and the lights dimmed, Aisha sat alone at the piano once more. She ran her fingers across the keys softly, feeling the warmth of the wood beneath her hands. She didn't know what the future would hold, but one thing was certain. She was no longer invisible. Her music had spoken for her, and no one could take that away. Outside, the moon hung high above the academy, glowing softly over the quiet streets. For the first time in many years, Aisha walked home not as a cleaner, but as a woman who had found her voice again. What she didn't know was that her journey was far from over, because the world she had just stepped into was about to test her in ways she could never have imagined. The next morning, the academy felt different. The performance from the night before was all anyone could talk about. Students gathered in the hallways, replaying the scene in their minds. The cleaner who had walked onto the stage and played like a world-class pianist. Even those who had doubted her stood in awe of what they had witnessed. The story spread far beyond the academy. Some guests who attended the concert posted about it online, calling her performance a miracle of pure talent. But while many admired her, not everyone was happy. Some of the advanced students felt humiliated. They had trained for years, spent money on lessons and instruments, and yet a woman who cleaned floors had outshined them all. Envy grew quietly like a shadow behind polite smiles. Aisha, however, didn't think about fame or attention. She was simply grateful. That night had given her something she thought she had lost forever: a sense of worth. When she arrived at work, she tried to go about her usual duties, but things had changed. People greeted her differently now. Some of the younger students smiled and whispered good morning as she passed. A few even asked for piano tips, their voices filled with genuine curiosity. Others avoided her altogether, unable to face the truth that talent didn't always come with privilege. When she walked into the director's office later that day, he looked up from his desk with a wide smile. "Ah, Aisha," he said warmly. "You made us proud last night. The audience loved you." Her cheeks flushed. "Thank you, sir. I didn't expect such a reaction. You reminded everyone why music exists," he said. "I received several calls this morning. People want to know more about you, where you trained, if you're planning to perform again." Aisha looked down, a bit uneasy. "I haven't thought that far. I never imagined playing again." He leaned forward. "You should. I want you to consider joining our evening classes. You don't have to pay. I'll take care of it. With a little polishing, you could perform professionally again." Her eyes widened. "You'd really do that for me?" He nodded. "It's the least we can do after what you've given this academy." She thanked him with tears in her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt seen not as a cleaner, but as a musician. After she left his office, she found Lara waiting in the hallway. The girl's face lit up when she saw her. "I heard the director offered you lessons." "Yes," Aisha said, smiling softly. "He wants me to train again." "That's amazing," Lara said, her excitement bubbling over. "You have to say yes. You were born for this," Aisha laughed. "I already did." They walked together toward the practice hall, their voices low and full of hope. But behind them, 2 other students stood by the lockers, whispering to each other. "She's taking lessons now?" one said bitterly. "Unbelievable. Next thing you know, they'll hire her as a teacher," the other muttered. "Jealousy is a quiet poison. It doesn't shout or scream. It spreads through whispers and fake smiles." In the days that followed, Aisha began to feel its weight. Some students would leave the room when she entered. Others made small remarks that cut deep, hidden behind polite tones. But Aisha kept going. Every evening she practiced under the guidance of one of the senior teachers. The moment she sat at the piano, everything else disappeared. Her music grew even stronger, richer with emotion. It wasn't just skill. It was life itself flowing through her hands. One evening after her practice session, Lara joined her. The girl had been struggling with a difficult piece for her upcoming performance test. Aisha sat beside her and gently corrected her posture. "Relax your shoulders," she said. "Don't fight the piano. Let it breathe with you." Lara tried again, following her advice. The melody began to flow more smoothly this time. "There," Aisha said softly. "See, it's not about control. It's about trust," Lara smiled. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not easy," Aisha replied with a gentle laugh. "It just takes patience." As they practiced together, a few students watched from the hallway. Some were impressed. Others frowned. "Look at her," one whispered. "She's acting like a teacher already." Another nodded. "I bet the director's planning to replace one of us with her." Those words reached the ears of a senior student named Clara, the same girl who had once laughed when Aisha first touched the piano. She had worked hard for years, dreaming of being recognized as the top performer in the academy. Watching Aisha rise so quickly filled her with silent rage. A few days later, when the director announced that Aisha would perform again at the academy's upcoming cultural night, the tension grew thicker. Clara couldn't believe it. "Another performance? Already?" she said loudly. "Is this a music school or a charity?" Her words were meant to sting, and they did. Aisha overheard them but said nothing. She only smiled politely and walked away. That night, however, her heart was heavy. She sat by the piano in the empty hall and let her fingers wander across the keys. The notes came out soft and sad, like a confession whispered into the dark. Lara found her there and said gently, "Don't let them get to you." "I'm trying," Aisha said quietly. "But it's hard. I never wanted attention. I just wanted to play." Lara nodded. "Then play for yourself, not for them. You've already proved who you are." Aisha smiled faintly. "You're wiser than you think." Days turned into weeks as the concert drew closer. Aisha practiced tirelessly, choosing a piece that spoke of struggle and hope. She poured her entire life into it. The years of pain, the moments of doubt, the joy of rediscovery. Every time she played it, she felt stronger. but jealousy doesn't rest easily. One afternoon when she arrived for her practice, she noticed the piano lid was left open and several keys were damaged. Someone had deliberately tampered with the instrument. Her hands froze as she stared at the broken wood. She didn't say a word, but her eyes filled with tears. She knew who might have done it, yet she didn't want to accuse anyone. Instead, she quietly found another piano and continued practicing. The director noticed later and had the damaged one repaired, but Aisha said nothing. Her silence spoke louder than any argument. It showed her grace and strength, qualities no one could break. Finally, the night of the second concert arrived. The hall was once again full, but this time people came not out of curiosity, but anticipation. They wanted to see if lightning could strike twice. Backstage, Aisha sat calmly, her fingers resting on her lap. Laura stood beside her, holding her hand tightly. "You're going to do great," she whispered. Aisha smiled gently. "This time I'm not afraid." When her name was announced, she walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. The audience remembered her, the cleaner who had made them cry with her music. She sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and began to play. The melody was soft at first, delicate like falling rain. Then it grew stronger, filled with emotion and strength. The room was silent again, not because of surprise, but respect. Everyone was listening with their hearts. When she finished, the applause was even louder than before. People stood clapping, cheering, some even crying. The director had tears in his eyes, proud beyond words. Aisha stood, bowed humbly, and smiled. It wasn't about fame or recognition anymore. It was about something deeper, reclaiming her place in the world. After the concert, people surrounded her, praising her performance. But she quietly slipped away to find Lara, who was waiting by the exit. "You did it again," Lara said with tears of joy. Aisha smiled softly. "No, we did. You believed in me when no one else did." They walked out together under the night sky, their hearts light and full of hope. But as they left, Clara stood alone in the corner, her jaw tight, her eyes filled with bitterness. She couldn't stand the way everyone looked at Aisha with admiration. Her envy burned quietly, growing darker with each cheer that echoed in her ears. She whispered under her breath, "Let's see how long her luck lasts." Aisha didn't hear it. She was too busy smiling, unaware that another storm was slowly forming behind her success, one that would test her courage, her kindness, and the very heart that had carried her this far. The following week began quietly, but Aisha could feel that something had shifted in the air. Her second performance had brought her respect, admiration, and a small spark of fame. People from outside the academy had begun to call, asking about her story. Journalists wanted interviews, music teachers wanted to meet her, and even a few small studios had offered her a chance to record her music. But Aisha didn't chase after any of it. She stayed humble, arriving early every morning to clean the halls before the students arrived. She didn't want special treatment, didn't want to lose the simplicity that had always been her strength. Yet no matter how quietly she tried to live, she had become a symbol, a reminder that talent could bloom anywhere, even in places no one bothered to look. That attention, however, didn't sit well with everyone. The jealousy that had been simmering behind the walls of the academy grew stronger after her second concert. Whispers turned sharper, and some students began to avoid her completely. A few teachers were divided too. Some believed she was a gift to the school. Others quietly thought she didn't belong among professionals. Clara was the most restless of all. Her pride had been wounded deeply. For years, she had trained to be the academy's shining star, and now her name was fading while the cleaner everyone once ignored was being praised across the city. One afternoon, as Aisha finished polishing the floor near the piano room, Clara walked in. Her expression was cold, her arms crossed tightly. "So you're the academy's new hero," she said in a sharp tone. Aisha looked up, surprised by the bitterness in her voice. "I'm not a hero. I just love to play." Clara took a step closer. "Don't pretend to be humble. Everyone's talking about you like you're some kind of legend. But you don't belong here. You're not one of us." Aisha stayed quiet for a moment, her voice calm but firm when she finally spoke. "Music doesn't belong to anyone, Clara. It's for everyone who feels it." That only made Clara angrier. "You think you can take everything I worked for? You think you can just walk in here and be admired?" "I didn't take anything," Aisha said softly. People chose to listen. That's all. Clara turned away, her jaw tight. Enjoy it while it lasts. Then she stormed out, leaving the echo of her heels clicking across the polished floor. Aisha sighed. She didn't hate Clara. She understood her pain. Jealousy was just another kind of sadness, born from fear and comparison. The next few days were busy. The Academy had been invited to send 2 performers to a national event, a showcase for the best music students from across the region. The director was proud of how far Aisha had come and decided to include her name alongside Clara's. When the announcement was made, the hall erupted in mixed reactions. Some clapped, happy for her. Others stared in disbelief. Clara's face went pale. She couldn't believe she'd have to share the stage with the woman she resented most. The tension grew as the event drew closer. Clara practiced constantly, determined to outshine Aisha. She told herself she would win back the attention she deserved. But the more she tried to play perfectly, the more mechanical her sound became. It lacked life, emotion, and heart, everything that came naturally to Aisha. Meanwhile, Aisha practiced quietly in the evenings, long after everyone had gone home. She wasn't trying to compete. She only wanted to share something beautiful, something honest. Her music wasn't about perfection. It was about truth. On the day of the event, the grand auditorium was filled with people from across the country, musicians, critics, students, and teachers. The energy was electric. Clara sat in the dressing room, staring at herself in the mirror, her reflection trembling slightly. She looked flawless in her elegant dress, but inside, she felt hollow. Aisha sat beside her, adjusting her simple shawl. "You'll do great," she said kindly. Clara didn't respond. She only stared at her reflection, her eyes distant. When it was time, Clara went first. Her performance was technically perfect. Every note hit with precision, every movement graceful. The audience applauded politely, impressed by her skill, but there was something missing. It was like a painting without color, beautiful but lifeless. Then it was Aisha's turn. She walked to the stage quietly, her steps soft but sure. The audience murmured, recognizing her from the stories they'd heard. She sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and began to play. Her piece started gently, a melody full of hope and memory. It was a song she had written herself, inspired by her journey, her struggles, her rediscovery of music. Each note seemed to carry her story, speaking directly to every heart in the room. Halfway through, something magical happened. The room fell completely silent, as if the air itself was listening. Even the judges leaned forward, caught in the emotion of her performance. Her fingers danced across the keys, not showing off, but sharing something real. When the final note faded, the silence lingered. Then slowly people began to clap. The applause grew until it filled the entire hall. Some stood, some wiped tears from their eyes. It wasn't just a performance, and it was a confession, a reminder of what music truly meant. Aisha stood, bowed humbly, and smiled. She wasn't thinking about winning or losing. In that moment, she had already won something much greater: peace. When the results were announced, Aisha was named the top performer of the night. Clara was second. The audience cheered, and photographers rushed to take pictures. Aisha turned to Clara, who stood frozen beside her. For a moment, the two women locked eyes. Aisha smiled gently and extended her hand. "You played beautifully," she said sincerely. Clara stared at her hand, torn between pride and shame. Then slowly she took it. Her voice was shaky. You deserved it." Aisha smiled softly. "So did you. Don't let anger steal your music." Those words stayed with Clara long after the event ended. In the following weeks, things began to change at the Academy. The tension slowly faded, replaced by a quiet respect. Clara started to open up again. And though she still struggled with envy, she began to see Aisha differently, not as competition, but as someone who had fought a harder battle than anyone realized. Aisha's story continued to spread. She was invited to small concerts, community events, and charity performances. Each time she played not for fame, but to inspire. She often spoke about how life can silence your dreams if you let it, but it's never too late to start again. One afternoon, the director called her into his office once more. "Aisha," he said, "there's something I want to offer you." She looked at him curiously. "I'd like to officially hire you as a part-time piano instructor," he continued. "You've taught this academy more than any textbook ever could. You've reminded us why we fell in love with music in the first place. Aisha's eyes filled with tears. She couldn't speak for a moment. Thank you, sir. I don't know what to say. Say yes, he smiled warmly. You've earned it. She nodded slowly, smiling through her tears. Yes, sir. From that day on, Aisha balanced two roles. She still cleaned the academy in the mornings by choice, but in the evenings, she taught young students how to play with feeling. She became known for her gentle teaching style, always reminding her students that talent was a gift. But humility was what kept it alive. One evening after class, Lara came running to her with a certificate in her hand. I passed my piano exam with top marks, she said excitedly. Aisha hugged her tightly. I'm so proud of you. You worked hard for it. You taught me everything, Lara said. Not just about music, but about life. Aisha smiled, her eyes shining. Then my job is done. As the sun set outside, the sound of music drifted through the academy halls. Students practicing, laughing, learning. Aisha stood by the piano, watching them, her heart full. She looked around the room, remembering where she started. A woman with a mop, cleaning other people's dreams, not knowing her own would rise again. Now, she wasn't invisible anymore. She had found her place not through fame, but through kindness, patience, and the courage to keep playing when life told her to stop. That night, as she locked the door and stepped outside, the wind carried a soft tune through the quiet street. She smiled, humming along, her spirit light. She had touched countless hearts, not with wealth or power, but with something far more lasting, the music of her soul. And though the city lights glimmered far away, Aisha knew the brightest light of all wasn't in the sky. It was within her.